Schneider's Bakery episodes are like Newton's third law. For every episode, there is an equal and opposite episode. Meaning, every time there's an episode that brings up a concept and does it poorly, there's another episode somewhere out there in the Schneiderverse that does the same concept way better.
Hey guys, Pie Guy Rules here, and holy cow, Zoey 101 is like the most anti-Schneider's Bakery show that Schneider's Bakery has ever produced.
It's actually a one-camera sitcom.
What does it mean to not be a 4-camera sitcom and instead be a 1-camera sitcom? Well, they get to shoot outside in unique locations that aren't just on an overly designed set. They get to employ unique camera angles and have more diverse visuals than just boring studio cameras that can only pan and zoom. And most importantly, there is no laugh track. Can you believe it? There is no laugh track. I didn't think I'd ever see the day of a Schneider's Bakery show without a laugh track. This is beautiful. I didn't think it was possible. And before anyone says it, yeah, this was made way before Henry Danger, Game Shakers, Sam and Cat. But still, from my perspective, it is very refreshing to see Zoey 101 style over all of these new sitcoms that look and sound the same. Now, I'm not trying to oversell this here because the show really isn't amazing or anything. The story and comedy are still fairly typical of the company's style, but all the little things they do with the camera and the locations really show an artistic creativity that I just don't see anymore in their current sitcoms. I'm not saying the show is good just because it's different, but from my current standpoint, knowing how the company would go on to hit the same exact note over and over again, it's just so refreshing to see that at one point they had at least a little bit of creativity in them. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual episode, and let's talk a little bit about the bottom of the bakery counterpart. So Blue Dog Soda was a very preachy episode that featured a very blatant straw man who was over the top and obviously wrong and a complete idiot, and also apparently the sole person in charge of what sodas are banned. The whole thing is very one-sided on the side of not banning these sodas, despite the fact that the episode actually shows Sam drinking way too much of the soda, and shows that these kids are so dependent on it that they're willing to illegally make the substance and sell it on the black market, and other kids are so dependent on it, they will buy it. The episode pretty much shows us the reason why this stuff should be banned, and yet comes to the conclusion that it absolutely shouldn't be. And look, I have no horse in this race. I can definitely see both sides of the argument of why a very unhealthy drink should be banned and why it shouldn't be banned. The episode isn't stupid for having a moral, it's stupid because the moral is incredibly one-sided, and that everything is set up in such a way so the characters can deliver a very cheesy speech about how the soda shouldn't be banned because Murica. So of course, there's no way that Schneider's Bakery would get by without having done the typical prohibition, banning of some sort of drink, and then characters doing an underground ring of selling the stuff story only once. And thanks to a little help from Twitter, I found out that Zoey 101 had the episode Coffee Cart Ban. Coincidentally, it's also one of the last episodes of the series, which is not exactly a great jumping on point for me here, but the show's simplistic enough that it really doesn't matter that I don't know exactly who all these characters are. So if hashtag Blue Dog Soda was an American flag dog cake that got shot a few times, then naturally, the opposite of it in an episode that's about coffee would be like a coffee cake. Yeah, I didn't even really need to think that hard about that one. It was just kinda obvious. Anyway, the episode is about a coffee cart accidentally hitting the dean's wife, knocking her over, making the dean of the school that they all attend declare coffee be banned from the premises. Why is it coffee in general and not just coffee carts that are banned? Well, because the dean obviously isn't acting rationally here and is upset that his wife got hurt. Anyway, with coffee banned, naturally, the rich kid in the school decides to make an underground cafe where he sells ridiculously overpriced coffee. Zoey and the girls decide that this is stupid and make their own underground ring of making coffee and sell it for more reasonable prices. The boys try to bust the girls, but the girls don't get caught and then decide to use Quinn's laser to mess with the boys' coffee shop. Yeah, I'll get to that later. But then both the boys and the girls get caught by the dean, and it turns out that the dean has his own coffee maker and has been breaking his own rules, and when confronted on this, decides to lift the coffee ban. So yeah, it's surprisingly straightforward. There's two competing underground underground coffee shops that are both trying not to get busted and trying to compete with each other. One of my biggest problems with hashtag Blue Dog Soda was how preachy and over the top it was with giving a lame speech, and in this episode, outside of one mention of how coffee isn't good for you, nobody really says anything or cares about how dependent these kids are on coffee. It's just kind of taken for granted that these kids really need coffee, and the entire reason for the ban has absolutely nothing to do with how unhealthy or healthy coffee is. Sure, it's a ridiculous scenario, but it's definitely ridiculous on purpose. Another problem with Blue Dog Soda I had was the way that the government guy was acting. He was very over the top and not in any sort of charming way, in the kind of way that makes you just say, yeah, that's bad acting, or more likely bad directing. And in this, the dean, who is the authority figure, is fine. He's a bit goofy, but he's not too over the top. He's still somewhat believable and realistic. And he seems like an actual authority figure and not a complete buffoon. In Blue Dog Soda, the entire episode seemed to just be set up for the characters to deliver a horribly blatant and in-your-face speech about America. And in this episode, the coffee ban seems to be a setup as well, but in this case, it's a setup for the characters to have competing businesses and a rivalry with each other, which from what I can gather seems to be natural for these characters. I mean, look, coffee cart ban isn't the greatest story by any means. The ending is very predictable, and the entire way they go about it plays out exactly as you would think. The kids accidentally discover the coffee maker, the dean fumbles around a bit and says, and then the kids are like, yeah, you should uplift the ban. And he's like, alright, yeah, sure, I'll uplift the ban. And my other issue with this is the whole laser beam thing. Yeah, after the boys try to bust Zoey and the girls don't try to bust the boys back, and instead they take Quinn's laser beam, which for some reason all of these Schneider's Bakery shows incorporate laser beams, is just randomly shoehorned into this show and Drake and Josh, and, well, I guess it actually makes sense in Henry Danger. But anyway, it's weird that this girl built this laser beam, and it's even weirder that they decide to use it to shoot holes in people's coffee cups so their coffee leaks out and the boys' business looks like an incompetent one? I mean, first of all, that's a rather jerky thing to do to the people who are just buying coffee. I mean, it's not their fault that it's overpriced. If you want to get back at the boys, you should get back at the boys, not their customers. Secondly, this is just the strangest way they could have gone about foiling them. Like, they may as well have just gone into the room and started slapping people's coffee cups out of their hands for the way they go about this. I mean, I guess it's stealthy that they're outside shooting the laser beam in at the people with the coffee cups, but it's not like they're really hidden from view. There's a very blatant window there. If anyone had just looked around once their coffee started randomly leaking, they would have clearly seen the girls. Also, it seems pretty dangerous for them to be shooting this laser around. It just seems like such an out of left field way for this story to go, and it doesn't actually add anything in the slightest. But outside of the fact that one of the story elements is very predictable, and the other story element just comes completely out of nowhere and doesn't feel right for the story at all, it's an alright story. I'm not necessarily going to recommend it, but I would definitely say it is a lot better than hashtag Blue Dog Soda, in that it feels like a more developed story and it's not preachy. Hi Guy Rules, out.